Hey, welcome back. This is Joel Duff. Today we're embarking on a journey through a small creation museum that holds significance for me due to its local nature. While many of you may be familiar with the well-funded and professionally presented creation museums like the one in Kentucky and Texas, operated by Answers in Genesis and Institutes for Creation Research, I want to draw your attention today to the smaller yet influential creation museums that are found in local communities. Unlike their more prominent counterparts, this particular local creation museum, and many others like them across North America, has been brought to life by the dreams of maybe one or two individuals who are very passionate about this topic. These individuals aim to spread the message of a young earth, or we might call it the young earth gospel, and challenge prevailing scientific narratives within their local communities. They generally cater to homeschoolers, Christian schools, and even sometimes public school educational programs. In this first part of my field trip report, I'll focus on the origins of a particular creation museum, its mission, and how it seeks to fulfill that mission. I'm interested in understanding the impact of these small local creation museums on their communities and how their message is perceived by those who encounter it. In a follow-up video, we're going to explore the majority of the exhibits and evaluate the quality, even critique the scientific content of this very interesting small local creation museum. So without further ado, let's visit the Akron Fossils and Science Center. We've got that coming up. So here I am. I'm at the Akron Fossils and Science Center. It's not actually in the city of Akron. It's in a suburb of Akron called Copley. And it's about 20 miles from my home. About a week ago, I bribed my daughter to come, with some lunch to say hey, let's go out and we're going to visit this little museum. And I want to get your thoughts on what you think as you go through this museum as well. And I'll tell you a little bit about those thoughts in the second video. But this video, as I said in my introduction, is more about the actual operations of a small creation science museum. What is it doing? How does it attract people to come to it? So let's take a little tour. This is their website, the Akron Fossil and Science Center. As I said before, it was opened up in the year 2005. And so I've seen it from its inception, or been around it since its inception. You can see, experience science all year long. And if you were to go to, the first thing you need to know is if you went to their website, you'd have to kind of dig down into the website to recognize that there's a creation science or creationism component to this particular science museum, because it is pitched as Fossil and Science Center. They have a bunch of educational programs which in their description say nothing about creationism. It's all about learning about science and the process of science and appreciating science and the scientific method. It's a whole bunch of workshops and after-school programs that bring in students and give them hands-on experiences with science education. Now, embedded in the website, I'm going to show you some of these things, but embedded in the website, then you learn that there is a portion of this Akron Fossils and Science Center, which is a creation education room or a creation education center, where you can learn about alternative viewpoints about the history of the earth. And that's where the creation science part comes in. So here I am outside, and this is just they bought an old business, retrofitted it into this museum. The entrance is that little door right there in the corner. And coming in the door, we've got, you probably can't read these because it's too small, but a whole list of activities and things that are going on, right? They've got events there. They have speakers that come in and give talks. They've got animal shows. I mean, it seems like a small local science museum. But if you look carefully at the pamphlets, you'll see that, you can see right here, exploring creation, all right, the word creation. Exploring creation with hands-on science. And then there's another pamphlet about the creation this one right here, if you can't read it quite. This is the Creation Education Museum, which is a little subcomponent of this particular place. All right, you got birthday parties, wacky science, jungle jamboree, party packages, all right, all kinds of stuff to do. And you'll note that right there above that, there is this plaque on the wall. It says Top 10 Northeast Ohio Best Children's Museum 2020. Right? Akron Fossils and Science Center. How much does it cost? How much money did I dole out in order to visit this creation museum? I paid $5 each. All right, because I paid $5 to go to the Creation Education Museum. Now, I could have paid $10 for general admission and be able to see everything. But the rest of the museum is really a guided tour, sort of through science. Now, maybe someday I'll go through that and sort of critique, like, how do they present science from a supposedly neutral viewpoint through the rest of the museum, and check out the rest of the grounds. I was really just interested in the creation science component, the creation science room, which, by the way, when it first started, the whole park was called like Truassic Park. That was the outside area. And then there was like the Creation Science Museum. And that was pretty much, it was devoted to teaching creation science or creationism. And then in 2000, I think it's 2016, they completely sort of reorganized and eventually came up with this sort of split personality where they have a creation education museum inside of the creation or inside of the Akron Fossil and Science Center. So it's one room that's separated. And so schools can bring kids there and they can go through all the other guided activities and play in the park and so forth without actually going into the Creation Education Museum, which is an extra charge. And so it's a separate charge, it's a separate space. But it's very obvious when you walk through the front door that there is this Creation Education Museum or Creation Education Museum right in front of you. And so that just to go in that room was $5, and that's what I paid. And then we also, went through the bookstore or the front room there as well. All right, no zip lines or any of that for us. All right, we are just right down to business. Let's get into that creation museum. All right, just a couple other things here, just to show you, give you a flavor for this place. All right, fun fossil tours, make fossil replicas, animal adventure tours. They got a zip line, right? You're finding fossils in this gravel pit, right? Outdoor play area. And then it is mentioned right here on this brochure, the Creation Education Museum. The Creation Education Museum inside of Akron Fossils. So this is how it's presented on the website. So you go to a sub-page to find out about what is this Creation Education Museum. So inside the Akron Fossil and Science Center, a small museum has opened. Well, really that museum has always been there, but like I said before, it's been isolated now. The museum is dedicated to, now listen to this language very, very closely. This is clever the way they've done this. This museum is dedicated to comparing and contrasting scientific models like intelligent design and evolution on the origin of the universe and catastrophism and uniformitarianism models on the geological record. Since science is all about searching and questioning, this new museum is a great fit for discovery, right? So we're gonna present the different sides to you. We're gonna present the science, and we're gonna present different models, different ways of understanding, different hypotheses, right? And then when you've looked at these hypotheses, you can decide, right? It's up to you to decide how to best interpret the evidence that you're going to be presented. You can see in that picture, you decide, and I'll be talking a lot about that in the second part when I go through in a lot of detail the different displays that are inside of here. All right, so this could be a great fit for discovery. This works really well because we're a science museum and a science education place, and what better thing to educate you about but the different models of the most important questions about the world, which is its origins and how it developed, how the world developed. Inside the Creation Museum, multiple views can be heard. In the end, the museum encourages you decide for yourself. With an abundant amount of information, you can survey the evidence, comparing with ideas with others, and drawing your own conclusions. Spoiler alert. There's not really a lot of there's not a lot of portrayal of the different sides. Yes, there's several displays in which it's like, here's the creation or catastrophic viewpoint, here's the uniformitarianism viewpoint, or here's a view of evolutionary biology versus creationist orchard. So there feels like in some places there's a side-to-side comparison, but Well, I got to tell you, it feels like 90% of the information in the building is all creation science promotion material with just a few little blurbs about other things. Most of it has been written in such a way that it's acting as if it's like, this is the best information that's known. Here's the evidence you need to know about. Here are the observations from the world. But the observations are very much taken from the young earth creationist literature. And when I show you in the second video, we'll look at some specific displays. And just to give you a bit of this, give a little bit away of what my overall impression, all right, of the displays is. For me, it was really wild because it's kind of like it's like a flashback. It's like walking back in history to the 1990s and going to like the ICR Creation Museum back when it was in California. Much of the information is completely outdated. And I'm going to show you some displays that would make many young earth creationists roll over in their graves. Most young earth creationists do not accept many of the pieces of evidence that are presented in this museum. So it was a sight to behold. I guess I was more surprised than I thought it would be by the particular displays that they had there. So I had a lot of fun putting that together and making that video. All right, a little bit more about the Fossil Center. All right, so the Akron Fossil Science Center is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Right? And what's its mission? To provide visitors of all ages with balanced, affordable, and hands-on educational opportunities to explore the science of the world past, present, and future. We're more than just a science center. We're a community of people dedicated to making learning fun and meaningful. We believe the best way to learn science is to experience, and this philosophy guides everything we do. Right? Notice nothing here about, this is not what you would see if you went to the Creation Museum in Kentucky, where it is very much focused on apologetics for preaching the gospel first, right? And it's like, here's evidence of the world, but all within the context of how you understand it within the context of the Bible. It's very secondary at this museum and only in one room. At the Akron Fossils and Science Center, participants and visitors become more than observers. They become researchers, experimenters, and even educators. Our exhibits and programs let you experience science firsthand, encourage understanding and deep critical thought. You understand what is being written here on this website is hoping to attract not just the homeschool community in the greater Akron area or Christian schools, of which many Christian schools in the area have events and bring their students here for the day to do all kinds of science stuff and see the Creation Education Center. But they're also trying to attract public school students to come to this to the Science Center. All right. They don't expect the public school kids to go through the Creation Museum portion, but that's a separate portion, which has a separate charge, right? And so it is a separate accounting for that. So they have a hands-on tour, which is, they have tour guides that take students through and show them all these displays and have them do different activities and so forth. It's one of the reasons I wasn't interested in that, because I was told I can't really just walk through the rest of the museum. It is only by guided tour. It's sort of like you have to participate in order to do that. And I wasn't really too thrilled with that component of it. And then on the website, it does mention that this is two places in one, which I've been mentioning several times here. All right, it has two exciting educational experiences to explore. The first and most familiar is, the Akron Fossils and Science Center, which is this educational science education site. But there's also the Creation Education Museum, which explores the ideas of origins about our universe. This museum was started by really one person, William Sanderson, and he had a friend, Dennis Osborne, who also collected materials for the museum. And William Sanderson has been a diehard young earth creationist for many years. Worked in other businesses, collected this on the side, and eventually put all of his material and artifacts together to make this creation museum. And this is the way many young earth creationists, small creation museums start. And I'll show you a couple at the end of other creation museums around the country in case you want to visit. Our visitors come and enjoy traditional community education put on by the Akron Fossils and Science Center team. Or you can embark on a different path, exploring what creation education takes place at the Creation Education Museum. And that happened in 2016. Now, I know that this is being promoted, the Fossil and Science Center. I know that's being promoted to public schools. And there have been public schools that have had their kids go to this place. And so here you see that even on the Akron Fossils and Science Center, they have an advertisement for the Ohio After School Child Enrichment Program, right? And parents in Ohio can go to this site and they can, if they qualify, usually it's a needs-based thing, but if you qualify, right, for the ACE program, you can get up to $1,000 credit, right, per child for after-school programs, right, which you can use for all kinds of qualified programs. And there's a whole list you can get from the state of like, here's who qualifies for being able to use these funds. And the Akron Fossils and Science Center is one of those, right? It's an approved after-school program that money from state tax dollars, right, can be used to have your kids, do an after-school program at the Akron Fossils and Science Center. And just to show you that, here's just an advertisement on, this is just a website that shows like after-school programs, right, for parents who are looking for programs. And so here's an advertisement for Jurassic Park Adventure Camp. The Jurassic Park portion of this is the outer area, right, a couple acres of playground around the Science Center. And so that's what's being advertised here. But it's going to come with, pretty much having to go to the Science Center as well as an after-school program. All right. Now, I have to admit, the staff, super nice there, right? They're very, very friendly. And there is they're not pushy, right? They're not preachy. In fact, they talk about the fact that that no one came and talked to me or tried to say anything to me when I was in the Creation Museum portion, the Creation Education Museum. All right, I paid my money. They said, you're welcome to take a look around. If you have any questions, you could ask us. But they were very much, this is you decide, right? We're just presenting information and you can make your own decision about what you've seen. So not a pushy environment. I'm sure that is done on purpose as part of their larger educational program. They don't want to be pressing this. I mean, this is close to their heart, right? The creation science part, but they also know that in order to survive, maybe financially, they need to have a larger footprint. So now I'm entering into the Creation Education Museum. All right, so just a couple slides here. This is what you're first hit with when you first enter the door into the Creation Education Museum. The purpose of the Creation Education Museum. Many people have never had an opportunity to see a different perspective of the explanation of the universe, planet Earth, and life. This museum seeks to present evidence for creationism. So now they are saying in this first line, we're here to present evidence for creationism. As I said before, the vast majority of the information provided is very much from a creationist perspective. The way it's presented and argued, it is very much promoting creationism, right? Young Earth creationism. Despite their website making it sound like they're going to present like different views, and here's like the best evidence for those different views, and you decide. It really is very much pushing young Earth creationism, and then maybe telling you like, here's how we compare to other viewpoints. Many have been led to believe that scientists who have a belief in the universe and everything in it was created by an intelligent God prevents them from doing good science. In fact, secular scientific community goes as far as saying you can only do good science by adhering to the naturalistic evolutionary approach to science. Well, I think the secular community says you can only do good science if you're following the scientific method, the methodology of doing science. It's not naturalistic. It's simply a methodology, a method for using the physical laws of the known universe to try to understand things around us. So the other side of this first panel is the typical answers in Genesis. There are two worldviews. There are only two ways you can look at the world. You can look through the glasses through the Bible, or you can look through naturalistic, atheistic, evolutionary assumptions. And those are the only two perspectives you can take. And the argument is there's only one set of facts, but there's two sets of interpretations. This is the typical dichotomous view that's presented. And that's going to be very much an emphasis in this museum. So let me read some of this here. There are essentially two competing worldviews that scientists have, which causes them to see the natural world and the origin of the universe differently. Creationism. There must be an intelligent mind behind everything. Everything came through the creative process of an intelligent mind. Hundreds of kinds of animals were created instantaneously. Versus secularism, which is associated with atheism, naturalism, materialism, no intelligence. Right? So there's your two positions. You're either a creationist and think that kinds were created separately, or you're an atheist. Everything just came by chance. Science tells us that life can only come from life, the law of abiogenesis. Darwin argues that the scientific evidence supports common descent. Are Darwinists actually confusing the evidence for common designer with common descent? That's the other major theme in the museum, is common descent or common design. So, last slide about this museum, and I'm going to save all the displays for the second video. So the second display, right next to the one I just showed you, Assumption Junction. Assumptions of a young Earth versus assumptions of an old Earth. So it's as if, okay, you're coming in, and let's say you're naive about really either viewpoint. You come in and you find out, okay, you're starting with an assumption of a young Earth, or you're starting with an assumption of the old Earth. You probably have some idea of what you think about the age of the Earth, right? It's young or it's old. And then you have data, right? This is the observations that individuals across time have made, all right? That's the scientific information, the data that's been collected about the world. And the implication here is that that data we all have, right? Whether you assume a young Earth or whether you assume an old Earth, we all have this same pile of data that we're sifting through. All right. And then you take a look at that data and you could come out with one of two interpretations. For example, you're looking at a clam. This clam died in a major catastrophe, having descended from originally created clams. Or you could look at the data with a second interpretation. The clam came as the result of millions of years of evolution, right? Where does the interpretation A lead? It's consistent with a young Earth. What if you interpret the data, you think the best interpretation of the data is B? Well, then your interpretation consists of an old Earth. It's consistent with an old Earth. So right away, coming into the museum, we're kind of presented with, you probably already have an assumption. And because of that assumption, when we show you the data, you might come out with a particular result that's not, it might be consistent, but it's only be consistent because you saw it through those assumptions, right? Through those particular glasses. That's kind of different than their actual literature, which suggests that if we just present you with a bunch of evidence, then you can decide, right? You can make an interpretation, as if I'm a blank slate and I can look at it and go like, oh, well, if I've examined all this evidence, it's obvious that the world is young because it just fits the evidence better, right? This is really about evidentialism versus presuppositionalism. Do you start with a presupposition and then filter all the data and evidence through that presupposition to get to the result that you already expected? You interpret it consistently within that particular presupposition. Or can you be swayed by evidence? You're presented with evidence, and then from the evidence you draw conclusions from that. Really, that whole debate about evidentialism and presuppositionalism is as wrong as this whole thing of like, there's only two ways of viewing the world, right? Two worldview glasses, atheist versus young Earth creationist, right? The truth of the matter is there's a lot of complex region in between. And the same thing with presuppositionalism. Presuppositionalists, I think ones that are thinking presuppositionalists, all right, will recognize that you should be able to alter your presupposition, right, by having evidence, be confronted with evidence that doesn't fit your presupposition. making you go back and re-examine your presupposition, just like the scientific method. I have a hypothesis. I have an initial idea. But eventually I realized that it doesn't really work well with the observations of the world around me. And therefore I need to reevaluate and maybe adjust my presuppositions, right? Which will then filter my interpretations, my secondary set of interpretations. And now I come out with a conclusion that's more consistent with the world's data. You decide, thousands or millions. Thousands or millions of years. Whole bunch of evidence presented. What did I decide? Well, you have to wait till video 2 for me to talk about that evidence. You might be wondering, does my town have a creation museum? I would say if you live in a large city, it's very likely there's some place there, there's someone there that has a very small creation museum. It might simply be a room in their house, right? It might be a little nook on the side of their bookstore that they have. But there are a few notable young Earth creationist museums that have been around for quite a while and are standalone museums that you may not have heard of. So the Boneyard Creation Museum, I've not been to. This is in Nebraska, and I don't know that much about it, but it's got a nice little website. The cost is kind of similar to the Creation Museum that I just visited. I imagine it probably is very similar in many ways. How about the Creation Adventures Museum? This is in Florida. I can't remember where we're in Florida. But anyway, it is begun by Gary Parker. Now, Dr. Parker is a well-known creation scientist. He worked for Institute for Creation Research, and then I believe he went with Ken Ham, or soon followed Ken Ham, to Kentucky, and was a prominent speaker for Answers in Genesis in the mid-90s. He's long since been retired, and he runs, along with his wife, a Creation Adventures Museum in Florida. And then, of course, there is the Creation Evidence Museum of Texas. And this is run by the infamous Carl Baugh. All right, Carl Baugh is one of those way out fringe young Earth creationists who's been around seemingly forever. And his claim to fame is the Paluxy Man Tracks, all right? The Paluxy River Man Tracks. That's a site where there's presumably human footprints and dinosaur footprints together. Now, this has long since been. Now, that site has been worked over many times by both creationists and non-creationists, showing that there really is, those are not human footprints. But Carl Baugh still swears that they are, and this museum is actually near Paluxy. And he's got lots of other far-out claims about creationism. But he has probably one of the largest creation museums outside of the major two, which are ICR and Answers in Genesis. So in part 2, we'll get down to the nitty-gritty. We'll critique the displays in the Creation Science Education Museum. And some of them are really fascinating. Like I said before, I was kind of stunned by what I saw in a few places. So we'll have some fun with that. But some final thoughts on the creation, on the Akron Fossils and Science Center. It's tempting to be kind of Okay, what else can I say about this Creation Science Museum, Creation Science Center? I know some of you want me to get all fiery and say we need to burn this place to the ground because it has it must be tainted, right? It's got creation science stuff inside. It's at the core of the building, right? In the inner sanctum, it's essentially creation science. And doesn't that creation science, must it not permeate the entire building and the way they present everything else? And so aren't families that come just from the local area and just look at it I need something to do with the kids, and there's a science education center and they got cool things for kids to do. That's worth my $10 to give them this experience. Or I need an after school program and I want my kids to know something about science, and so I'll take them there. I can't say that that's a bad thing because, I didn't take the tour, right? So I haven't heard what they say specifically outside of the Creation Education Center, right? And I can't say that they aren't getting an appropriate experience with just the way what science is and how it works. Having actually known some of the people that work there or have worked there in the past, I've known some homeschoolers and I've known some that have donated an enormous amount of time and effort to help get that place off the ground. I don't know anyone that works there now, but I know that they were truly interested in science, as just like fascinated with science. So not just proselytizing creation science, which I think of as Ken Ham and others as not actually being interested in science. You know, it's a tool, and it's an evangelical tool. In this case, I think from the start they're interested in science, and so I think there's a chance that kids who come there are being inspired, all right, by fossils and other things, and they're maybe learning some basic stuff. And even if there is a hint, all right, of a little bit different interpretation, a little bit different spin on how to understand the world past, present, and future, I'm not sure it's like the worst thing in the world. All right, I'm not calling for the doors to be closed, but I do call for some caution. All right. Would I prefer that the Creation Education Center wasn't there? Yeah. That's like, and I will be very critical when we get to part 2, because part 2, we're going to focus on what is actually being presented in terms of the scientific evidence and the interpretation of that evidence. And I don't feel bad ripping into that. All right. Because of my knowledge level of that area, and mostly what I'm going to do is I'm going to be showing how many of the displays are outdated in such a way that even young Earth creationists believe that the stuff that they're presenting is bogus. All right, so in that case, they're not just presenting bad interpretations of data. All right, interpretations I disagree with. They're presenting bad data. Right, and so that's a big problem. And so I will definitely dig into that and talk about that. There's some really fun examples. But the people are extremely friendly there. It's not overpriced. It's it's a little local fun house that happens to have a young Earth creationist spin on the inside. And since 2016, having isolated that Creation Education Museum, it's not the experience that I once was more upset about in the past. I know some of you probably think, well, that's nefarious, right? You know, they've separated it sort of financially so that they can get away with offering a public service for public tax dollars, while at the same time it's a religious enterprise. And so I think there's merit to criticism there, and somebody should probably do some more research on that. I don't know what the actual breakdown there is in terms of the finances. And so I would understand individuals being upset about that. But it's not like it once was, where they were essentially trying to bring in people with a kind of neutralish looking website and then just whacking them with creation science through and through. Like all their programs had some creation science element. Now they've separated it off and sort of isolated that in such a way that I don't think it has the same impact. I think probably they're doing it for their own financial solvency. Right. They have a donation thing once a year. They have a big auction and they raise funds for the place, and it continues to grow. And actually, the displays aren't too bad. Some of them have been really updated a lot. It's quite nice inside. But still, I think they need those. I think they need others rather than just homeschoolers and Christian schools. I know a lot of Christian schools go there. The kids, I'll admit it. My own kids have been there. Right, I think at least 2 of them have actually been to the Akron Fossil and Science Center, in which case they actually visited the Creation Education Center as well, because that was a highlight, for those teachers to take them there. And I know you're going to be like, I can't believe you let your kids go there. That's another topic for another day. I will discuss that. You can ask me questions about that. I'm willing to talk about like why it is that I've allowed that to happen and how I interact with my kids and deal with that situation with the school. All right. So I have a particular approach to that. So, but anyway, my kids' own school has taken multiple field trips to this location, and so that's another thing that keeps them alive. But nonetheless, even with that audience, I think they really want to. They're really trying to branch out and capture a much broader audience, partly just for solvency, but also as a it's a witness tool. So it's an evangelical tool. But as I said, it's not an over-the-top evangelical tool. I really don't get at all an oppressive feel like you would at the Creation Museum. All right, the Creation Museum is all about Christian apologetics. This is much more subtle unless you're right in the Creation Museum itself. All right, I think that's enough about the actual Creation Museum and sort of how it functions. Let's get to video number 2 coming up next, which is going to be, I think for me, is the more interesting part and the part I really want to talk about, which is going through the displays and critiquing the science. Right. Until then, we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.